Howdy, everybody. So today we're going to be doing a quick run through of the Cold War, kind of the beginning, middle, and then the fall end of the Cold War. So we're going to go pretty quick through these. I'm not going to spend too much time on any of the individual topics, but just want to give you a rundown of kind of the big highlights of the Cold War. So starting off with the Cold War, it's going to fall to Harry S. Truman as president since he took over after FDR died. Now, the big issue that's going to spark the Cold War is you have England and much of Europe getting aid from the United States to rebuild after the Cold War. Russia asked for the same aid, but since they're communist, they didn't really go along with us the way we wanted at the end of World War II. We reject their aid or reject giving them aid. We have this innate fear of communism and spreading across the whole globe. We see it as this kind of evil ideology. So Truman makes what's called the Truman Doctrine, where we have to stop the expansion of communism, stop it anywhere in the world, and prevent it from continuing, prevent it from spreading. In order to do this, you have what's called the Marshall Plan, named after a US politician named Marshall. And this Marshall Plan is about the rebuilding of Europe. And it was the most successful rebuilding plan in world history. We basically rebuilt Europe. We had each of these individual countries basically write up a plan, give us that plan, and we helped fund it. So this is a major step forward. You have the creation of the CIA. So while the FBI operates as a domestic investigatory body, the CIA finds intelligence abroad. So the CIA shouldn't be operating within the United States, and the FBI shouldn't be operating outside of the United States. So they kind of each have their own zones in which they operate. So you have the divided Berlin, and this is kind of one of the first contention points over the Cold War. So basically the British, American, and French zones are all combined into one, and the Soviet zone maintains theirs. But the issue is Berlin is also divided during this time. So to kind of shore up defenses and kind of ally with East or West Germany at this point, to ally with West Germany and provide support for Berlin that's now being isolated in the Soviet territory, the United States and Western Europe create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO. Basically, this is a defensive alliance. And you can see, France, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, Portugal, United States, England, France, all of these are all together in this NATO. So it's a united front basically against communism. Russia wasn't thrilled about this, so they create their own, the Warsaw Pact. So everything in red joined the Warsaw Pact, and everything in blue joined NATO, and everything in yellow is basically non-aligned. Then you have the weird case of Yugoslavia and Albania, which are communist, but they're kind of on the peripheries of Soviet control. So the true Eastern Bloc, so this is the core of what the Soviet controlled and Russia controlled are. So you have Russia, kind of the redder color, and then the pinker color is what they control and have heavy influence within. So it's basically a standoff between Russia and the United States. It's a staring contest for most of it, but there's going to be small flare-ups within this larger Cold War conflict. Now the big issue is nuclear bomb. The United States was the world power for a short window when we were the only ones with atomic technology. But very quickly, Russia develops how to use nuclear bombs as well. Then China falls to the communists. Mao Zedong leads the communist revolution in China, and China falls to the communists. And this is a huge fear for the United States because China is a massive country. So you can see a big chunk of the world is either controlled by Soviet Russia or under communist rule. Now, Korea had been divided during World War II or in the aftermath of World War II, and tensions flared and a Korean War will break out vying over, is Korea going to be communist or is it going to be capitalist and democratic? What's the face of Korea going to be, or the fate of Korea going to be? So the Korean War breaks out and ultimately ends up as a stalemate. Now, Joseph McCarthy is a politician from the United States. He is going to say, oh, I have names of communists active in the US government. No, he doesn't. He's trying to drum up fear, make a name for himself off the fear of communism. But he's going to create a red scare, communist scare in the United States, and he had this era of McCarthyism, or witch hunt era, looking for communists. People like Alger Hiss lend credibility to this because Hiss, during the war, had been a spy for the Soviets. And he was arrested and tried for perjury of lying under oath, since the spying criteria had already passed for what he could be punished for. HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, is McCarthy's committee that's hunting all these suspected communists. They find people like Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who supposedly leaked our nuclear secrets to help the Russians get the bomb. Now, you have small cases like Alger Hiss and Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, or individual cases like that lend enough credibility to the fear of communist infiltration that everyone thinks communists are lurking around every corner, which they aren't. But McCarthy pursues and says there's even communists in the military. We have televised trials of the US Army defending themselves, eventually with their head lawyer, basically decrying McCarthy, saying, do you not have any shame? Do you not have any sense? And he does this on national television, and everyone kind of realizes McCarthy is just a bully and a name caller. However, this fear of communism spills over, and they use this fear of communism to target homosexuals, gay men and women in government, forcing them to resign and basically be blacklisted. Now, they were never at any inherent risk to the United States, but nonetheless, because their lifestyle was not one that was socially acceptable at the time, you have what becomes known as the lavender scare. So instead of the red scare, the lavender scare, where no communists were found, but homosexuals in all levels of government were being pushed out, and thousands are going to lose their jobs. And even if you were just related to someone who was gay, that could get you fired. So this is where it gets really sinister. Now, kind of shifting towards the middle, the Kennedy era of the Cold War. So Eisenhower inherited kind of that Cold War, and he's going to continue what Truman set up. But Kennedy's going to deal with kind of the biggest flare-ups of the war. So one of the first he's going to deal with is the Bay of Pigs, where we try to have Cuban exiles invade Cuba and overthrow Castro, a communist leader. It goes poorly, and it makes the United States look bad. It's actually going to push Castro closer into the arms of the Russians. But Kennedy looks good to the American people because they think he's taking a strong stand against communism. Castro, however, is looking for protection from the United States. So, only place to look is to Russia. Now, Kennedy and the Russian leader actually get into shouting matches overseas over issues like the Bay of Pigs. Then the Russians begin building the Berlin Wall, basically encapsulating West Berlin and isolating it from the rest of East Germany. Now keep in mind, West Berlin runs all of West Germany, even though Berlin is solely in East Germany. So they build this wall, and this is going to be the kind of physical vision of the Cold War. Then, on October 14th, 1962, US spy planes, called the U-2 spy plane, discovers there are missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles being set up in Cuba that they got from Russia. This starts the Cuban Missile Crisis. that it actually brings the United States and Russia to the brink of actual war, of nuclear war. Thankfully, cooler heads prevail. Kennedy and Russia talk, and they come to peaceful conclusions of this. Missiles are removed. We agree to remove some of our missiles in Europe, and the war is averted. But on this brink, things are looking pretty bad for the nation, and pretty bad for the Cold War. And then Kennedy is going to get tangled in the Vietnam War. So the Korean War had been fought to a stalemate, but now Vietnam was flaring up. Ho Chi Minh had come to the United States for help to gain independence for his country. The United States had rejected his offer, his help, or his request for help, and he turns to the communists. Now the United States did not like this, and we have tensions flare up, and a war ensues over Vietnam that will continue for a very long time. It's going to be one of the longest wars ever fought by the United States, even though we technically never declare war. Top of everything else, you have civil rights in the United States flaring up in the midst of this Cold War. And Russia is going to use this against us, saying, oh, how can you declare yourself morally superior when you treat your own people so horrifically? You have Martin Luther King Jr. give his famous I Have a Dream speech during this time period, trying to restore some sort of peace and order to this chaotic time. Now, the last little bit of the Cold War, you have Nixon reaching out to China to try to ease some of those tensions. And you have a period of time called détente, where we're starting to ease up tensions with Russia, ease up tensions with China, start reaching out to China to make some sort of peaceable communication. Nixon actually visits China. And for all the successes of Nixon in foreign policy, the scandal over Watergate kind of mars many of them. So this is that détente period. Then you have Reagan, who meets with Gorbachev and urges them to tear down the Berlin Wall, to open up all of the Soviet states. And slowly they begin doing so. And Gorbachev begins opening up the USSR, and slowly the USSR, as they try to open up, it begins collapsing under its own weight. The Berlin Wall is torn down. So George H.W. Bush is going to preside over the end of the Cold War. He's going to see the USSR collapse under its own weight. He will see the Eastern Bloc begin to self-determine what they want to be. Do they want to be communist or do they want to be capitalist? So this is a quick overview of the Cold War, a few of the major highlights of what was going on and kind of a timeline of the events that happened. This is not comprehensive, this is not all of them, this is just a highlight. Some of the few important ones that we'll talk about, or we have been talking about in class and that you've been reading about in your book. We'll stop there for today, and we'll pick up with another lecture next time.